In the uneasy silence after the First World War, Europe told itself it had learned its lesson. Borders were redrawn, empires were dismantled. Speeches were made about peace lasting generations. But beneath the surface, humiliation festered, economies buckled, and millions nursed grievances that would not fade. In that fragile atmosphere, a handful of men began whispering about destiny, and within a decade, their whispers would drown out the promise of peace. The 1930s did not erupt into war overnight. The catastrophe grew patiently, fed by ambition and fear. In Germany, Adolf Hitler rose to power promising restoration of pride, of territory, of greatness. He told a wounded nation that history had wronged it, that treaties had shackled it, and that only boldness could restore its rightful place. In Italy, Benito Mussolini dreamed of resurrecting Rome's ancient glory. And in Asia, the imperial ambitions of militarist leaders in Japan were already being written in blood across China. They spoke the language of destiny. What they meant was expansion. The first moves were calculated, almost surgical. In 1938, German troops marched into Austria in what became known as the Anschluss. There were no major battles, many cheered. Europe protested, but it did not intervene. Months later, Czechoslovakia was forced to surrender its fortified borderlands under the Munich Agreement. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain returned home declaring peace for our time. For a brief moment, it seemed compromise had worked. But compromise in this case had only taught a dangerous lesson. Each success emboldened Berlin. Each hesitation from London and Paris reinforced the belief that risk would be rewarded. The German military machine, rebuilt in defiance of treaty restrictions, grew more confident. Factories hummed, propaganda soared. And still, Europe hoped that the storm could be contained, that satisfying territorial demands would satisfy ambition itself. It was a miscalculation that would soon shatter the continent. Then came the move that stunned even seasoned observers. In August 1939, Hitler signed a non-aggression pact with his ideological enemy, Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact contained a secret protocol. Poland would be divided between them. Two regimes that publicly despised each other quietly agreed to carve up a sovereign nation. The shock rippled across Europe, but the full implications were still sinking in. On September 1, 1939, German forces crossed into Poland at dawn. Dive bombers screamed overhead, artillery thundered. Cities like Wilu were bombed before many residents were fully awake. Tanks advanced in coordinated waves, a new form of warfare the world would soon call blitzkrieg. Polish troops fought fiercely, but they were outmatched in speed and coordination. Weeks later, Soviet forces entered from the east, sealing Poland's fate. The country was torn apart exactly as planned, and Europe realized that this time, there would be no quiet settlement. On September 3, 1939, United Kingdom and France declared war on Germany. The announcements crackled over radios into homes where families sat frozen, remembering the trenches of 1914. What had begun as strategic expansion now ignited into a global conflict. The old promises were ash, the gamble had escalated beyond control, and the world stood on the edge of something far darker than anyone yet understood. If you're drawn to stories that uncover the human currents beneath global events, the ambition, fear, and fragile decisions that reshape history, consider subscribing and liking this video. It helps more people discover these stories, and it allows us to continue telling them with the depth and care they deserve. Because the invasion of Poland was not the end of escalation, it was only the opening act. Beneath the declarations and headlines, something else was already unfolding, a conflict at sea, in the air, and in the political shadows that would soon prove just how unprepared the world truly was. Poland's defeat was swift and brutal. Within weeks, the country was erased from the map, divided neatly between Berlin and Moscow as agreed. To outside observers, it appeared that the gamble had paid off spectacularly. Two dictators had outmaneuvered Europe's old powers. The speed of the German advance stunned military planners. If this was modern war, then modern war belonged to Germany. And that realization sent a chill through every capital on the continent. But even as the land campaign ended, another war had already begun, one fought in darkness and cold Atlantic waters. Just hours after Britain declared war, the German submarine U-30 torpedoed the passenger liner Athenier. Civilians, men, women, children, plunged into black, freezing waves. The message was unmistakable: no one was beyond the reach of this conflict. The oceans, once highways of empire and commerce, were now hunting grounds. This maritime struggle would become known as the Battle of the Atlantic, a grinding, relentless contest over supply lines and survival. German U-boats stalked merchant convoys carrying food, fuel, and weapons to Britain. Every sinking threatened starvation on an island nation dependent on imports. Sailors lived with constant tension, scanning gray horizons for the faint outline of a periscope. Sometimes they saw nothing at all, only the explosion beneath their hull. Far from the North Atlantic, another drama unfolded off the coast of South America. The German pocket battleship Admiral Grafspee had been raiding Allied shipping with calculated precision. British naval forces pursued it across thousands of miles of ocean. In December 1939, the two sides clashed at the Battle of the River Plate, damaged and cornered in Montevideo Harbor. The Grafspee's captain made a fateful decision. Rather than risk destruction at sea, he scuttled his own ship. Flames rose against the twilight sky, a spectacle witnessed by thousands, and a signal that Germany's reach, though formidable, was not limitless. Yet on land in Western Europe, something strange occurred. After the declarations of war, armies mobilized and then waited. Along the French-German border stood the imposing Maginot Line, a chain of fortifications designed to prevent another invasion like 1914. British troops crossed the channel to reinforce their allies. And then silence. This period became known as the Phony War. Newspapers printed cautious headlines. Soldiers played cards in bunkers, civilians adjusted to blackout curtains and ration books. It was a war without visible battle, and that illusion of stillness lulled many into a dangerous sense of security. But the quiet massed preparation. In April 1940, Germany shattered the illusion. Troops surged into Denmark, which capitulated within hours. Simultaneously, German forces struck Norway, seeking control of vital iron ore shipments from Sweden that fed the Reich's war industries. Allied forces attempted to intervene, landing troops in freezing fjords and mountainous terrain. The fighting was fierce and chaotic, yet despite moments of bravery, coordination faltered. German forces consolidated control. The Norwegian royal family fled into exile. And in Britain, the failure sparked outrage and political crisis. The consequences were immediate. Confidence in Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain collapsed. Parliament demanded stronger leadership, someone prepared not merely to manage the war, but to confront it with unflinching resolve. On May 10, 1940, as German forces launched a massive offensive in the West, a new prime minister took office, Winston Churchill. He inherited not stability, but a gathering storm. On the very day Churchill entered Downing Street, German forces rolled into Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. The waiting was over. The phony war ended in thunder. What had seemed like invincibility at sea and cautious stalemate on land was about to be replaced by something far more terrifying, a collapse so rapid it would shock the world. And within days, the Allied armies would find themselves trapped, their backs pressed against the sea, staring at annihilation. The German offensive in May 1940 unfolded with breathtaking speed. Columns of tanks, supported by dive bombers and mechanized infantry, smashed through Luxembourg and the Low Countries. Dutch defenses crumbled under aerial bombardment. Belgian forces struggled to hold key crossings. To many observers, it seemed like a repeat of 1914, Germany sweeping west through familiar corridors. But this time, the true blow was not where anyone expected, and by the time Allied commanders realized it, the trap had already snapped shut. The masterstroke came through the Ardennes forest, terrain long considered too dense and rugged for a major armored thrust. French planners believed it a natural barrier. German commanders saw opportunity. Panzer divisions carved narrow roads through trees and hills, emerging suddenly across the River Meuse. Within days, they broke through French lines and raced toward the English Channel. The speed was staggering. Communications faltered, units were isolated. What had been envisioned as a defensive stand became a desperate scramble. By May 20th, German spearheads reached the coast near Abbeville. The Allied armies in northern France and Belgium were cut off from the main French forces to the south. British Expeditionary Force units, alongside French and Belgian troops, found themselves compressed into a shrinking pocket. The realization dawned slowly, then all at once, retreat east was impossible. Retreat south was blocked. Behind them lay only the sea. Panic mingled with discipline. Soldiers marched north toward the French-board town of Dunkirk, harried by air attacks and artillery. Roads clogged with refugees fleeing the fighting. Equipment was abandoned to keep columns moving. At the beaches, tens of thousands gathered in exposed lines stretching along the sand, steering across the gray waters of the English Channel. German forces tightened their ring. Air raids pounded the shoreline. It seemed only a matter of time before surrender or annihilation would follow. And yet, in that moment of near-certain disaster, something extraordinary began. The British Admiralty launched Operation Dynamo, an evacuation effort that defied logic. Warships crossed from southern England under constant threat of bombing and submarine attack, but they were not alone. Civilian vessels answered the call: fishing boats, river launches, pleasure yachts, tugboats, anything that could float. Ordinary citizens steered into a war zone, navigating smoke and debris to reach stranded soldiers. The scene was chaotic, heroic, and terrifying all at once. The original hope had been to rescue perhaps 45,000 men. Each night, more were lifted from the beaches and harbor moles. Destroyers packed soldiers onto decks meant for far fewer. Small boats ferried men from shallow waters to larger ships offshore. Under relentless pressure, the operation continued for 9 days. When it ended, over 340,000 British and French troops had been evacuated. It felt, to many in Britain, like a miracle, but it was a miracle shadowed by loss. Nearly all heavy equipment, tanks, artillery, vehicles, had been left behind. The army had been saved, but it was largely disarmed. In France, morale shattered. On June 10th, sensing opportunity, Italy entered the war on Germany's side. Southern France faced new invasion routes. German forces pressed southward with relentless momentum. Within weeks, Paris fell. The French government sought armistice. In a railway carriage at Compiègne, the same location where Germany had signed its surrender in 1918, France capitulated. Hitler toured the streets of Paris in triumph, pausing before landmarks like the Eiffel Tower. Photographs captured him gazing at the city he had conquered without a prolonged siege. Western Europe lay under German control or influence. The map of the continent had transformed in a matter of weeks. Democracies had fallen with alarming speed. The Wehrmacht appeared unstoppable. Only one major power in Western Europe remained unconquered: Britain. Across the Channel, the island nation stood alone. Its army rescued but weakened, its allies defeated. The German war machine had swept from the North Sea to the Pyrenees in a single, devastating campaign. The illusion of invincibility had hardened into something close to reality. But across those narrow waters, pilots were already climbing into their cockpits, and a new kind of battle was about to decide whether invasion would follow. If you're finding value in this deep, human exploration of history, not just the battles, but the decisions and turning points that shaped them, take a moment to like and subscribe. It truly helps more people discover these stories and keeps thoughtful historical storytelling alive. Because the next confrontation would not be fought on beaches or forest roads. It would be fought in the sky, and the fate of Britain would hang on every scramble alarm. By the summer of 1940, the map of Europe told a brutal story. Poland had been partitioned, Scandinavia had fallen. France had collapsed in weeks. From the Arctic Circle to the Pyrenees, German forces dominated the continent. Only one nation remained openly defiant: the island kingdom across the channel. But defiance alone could not stop an invasion, and Hitler understood that before any boots could land on British soil, the skies above it had to belong to Germany. Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of Britain, depended on air superiority. Without control of the air, German barges crossing the channel would be easy prey for the Royal Navy, so the Luftwaffe prepared to crush the Royal Air Force. Airfields, radar stations, aircraft factories, these became primary targets. In July 1940, the Battle of Britain began not with a single dramatic clash, but with probing attacks, testing defenses and response times. The question loomed over both sides. Could Britain survive sustained assault from the most formidable air force in Europe? The Royal Air Force faced staggering odds. Fighter pilots, many barely out of training, scrambled daily in Hurricanes and Spitfires to intercept incoming formations. They climbed into thin air, engines straining, scanning for the dark spakes of bombers escorted by Messerschmitt fighters. Combat was fast and merciless. Pilots described it as a blur of noise, vibration, and instinct. Some never return. Others landed with bullet-riddled wings and shaking hands, refueled and rearmed for the next sortie. Britain possessed one crucial advantage: radar. Along the southern coast, an invisible network of radio detection stations scanned the horizon. It provided early warning, precious minutes that allowed Fighter Command to deploy squadrons efficiently. This technological edge, combined with disciplined command under Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, prevented the RAF from being overwhelmed outright. Still, losses mounted, airfields were cratered, hangars burned. Each day seemed to push Britain closer to exhaustion. By late August, the Luftwaffe intensified its campaign against RAF infrastructure. Air bases in southern England were battered relentlessly. Pilots flew multiple missions a day. Mechanics worked through the night repairing damaged aircraft. Some in the German high command believed victory was near, that one final push would shatter British resistance. The pressure was immense. If Fighter Command broke, invasion would follow swiftly. Then in early September, strategy shifted. After a British bombing raid on Berlin, small in scale but symbolically bold, Hitler ordered retaliation against cities. The Luftwaffe redirected its focus from airfields to urban centers, beginning a sustained bombing campaign against London and other major cities. On September 7th, waves of German bombers darkened the capital's skies. Docks erupted in flame, entire neighborhoods were reduced to rubble. Civilians crowded into underground stations seeking shelter as sirens wailed overhead. The bombing continued night after night. In what became known as the Blitz, families slept on platform floors. Firefighters battled infernos that turned streets into furnaces. St. Paul's Cathedral stood amid smoke and falling ash, an image that came to symbolize endurance. The human toll was severe, thousands killed, tens of thousands injured. Yet the shift away from RAF airfields allowed Fighter Command to recover. Pilots regrouped, aircraft production continued. The window for invasion began to close. On September 15, 1940, the Luftwaffe launched a massive daylight assault. RAF squadrons rose in force, engaging bombers over southern England and London. German losses were heavy. The message was unmistakable: Britain's air defenses had not collapsed. Within weeks, plans for Operation Sea Lion were indefinitely postponed. The invasion never came. For the first time in the war, Hitler had been decisively checked. Britain stood battered but unbowed, its cities scarred, its people grieving, its pilots exhausted, yet its sovereignty intact. The illusion of unstoppable conquest had cracked in the skies above the Channel. What had begun as a war of territorial ambition had evolved into a global struggle that would soon engulf the Soviet Union, North Africa, and eventually the United States. The World War was no longer a European conflict, it was becoming something far larger.